Hi, everyone. I thought I would talk a little bit about some of the material in Chapter 11. As you know, I don't go through the chapter, looking at each topic, but there's a topic that I want to do spend a little bit more time on. It's the idea of what's called promotion tournaments. Now, what exactly is this, and why does it matter? Well, let's look at suppose we look, at CEO compensation. How much do CEOs make? Wow. The head of Tesla, Elon Musk, made over $2 billion in 2018. That's a lot of money. And these are the top seven or so CEO pay, for 2018, 246 million, 129, heck, 64 million. That's not too shabby either. So the point here is that CEOs make a lot of money. Now, that being the case, one of the questions that's arisen is why would CEOs get paid that much money? Now, you might say, well, maybe their marginal revenue product is that high. If a CEO makes a good decision, then clearly it can have an effect of billions of dollars on the corporation's bottom line. But a couple of economists, Sherwin Rosen and Edward Lazar, came up with a different idea where you might want to pay a CEO a very high salary because of the incentive that it gives to others to work hard. Now, let's think about an example. Suppose we think about a golf tournament. Suppose we take some of the best players in the world, the four best golfers, and we say, we're going to have a tournament. Now, let's look at three assumptions as to how it might apply to the golf tournament, and then look at how it might apply to people trying to become CEO at a firm. Now, here are these assumptions. Let's assume the award amount is fixed. So in other words, the prize in the tournament might be $10 million. There's going to be a fixed amount of a prize. We're also going to say that the amount that you get in the tournament, in a golf tournament, is dependent upon your relative performance. Now, 72 for an 18-hole round of golf is what's called par. And, if you get below par, then you're doing really well. So in this case, the absolute score you shoot, be it a 69, a 70, a 74, doesn't matter. The only thing that matters is how do you perform relative to other people. Relative performance is what matters. And finally, we're going to assume that people will work harder if it turns out that the reward is greater. In our golf tournament, suppose we have a situation where the tournament, we have four golfers playing and the prize is $1,000. They might not practice very hard. They might not care. If the prize is $10 million, winner take all, they're going to practice like mad. Think, for example, if one of the classmates, or let's say I take four people in the class and I say we're going to have a golf tournament and whoever gets the lowest score gets an A in the course, that would probably give you an incentive to practice your golf very hard. Now, how would a tournament work in terms of a firm? Let's suppose we have a situation where the CEO, we only have one CEO, makes $5 million. Now, not all vice presidents are equal. Some are what we call senior vice presidents. This is sometimes called the C class, the CFO, the chief financial officer, the CMO, the chief marketing officer, the CTO, the chief technology officer. Now, you might have, for example, a vice president of marketing, and maybe we'll have four of these senior vice presidents, and they each get $1 million. Now, there's other junior vice presidents. There might be vice presidents of advertising and a vice president of social media and a vice president of communication, and they all might report to the vice president of marketing. So these senior vice presidents, they will be making $1 million, and these junior vice presidents will be making $500,000. Not too shabby. And maybe our firm has 30 managers, and these managers make $150,000. So here's the idea. If you look at this and you're a manager, you're making $150,000, what you're going to say is, you know what? I'm going to work really, really hard because if I can make it to the next rung, I can make $500,000. That's a hell of a lot of money. If you're a junior vice president, you're making $500,000, you say, hey, that's really good, but you know what? If I work really hard, maybe instead of working 50 hours a week, I work 60 hours a week, I can get promoted and become a senior vice president. I'll make $1 million a year. And then if you happen to be a senior vice president, you say, wow, I'm working 60, 70 hours a week, but if I work 75 or 80, I can make 5 million. The idea here is that this reward will cause you to work very hard to try and get promoted. And you've structured the rewards so people lower down will work very hard so they can rise up and make the big money. So the idea here of a promotion tournament is if you know there's a big prize at the end, you're going to bust tail. The book talks about something that's called a rat race, and I've seen this in action in some firms where they'll say, okay, we have 8 salespeople, tell you what we're going to do. We're going to have a competition. We'll call it a rat race. At the end of the month, the 6 salespeople that have sold the most cars, we're going to keep them. The other 2, it's time to hit the road. So the idea here is you give a big reward, and it's not that your absolute performance determines how well you're going to do. It's your relative performance. If you are a junior VP and you can outperform the other junior VPs, then that's going to get you to become a senior vice president. And what we find out is if you can work really hard as a senior vice president, you can become a CEO. It's interesting to note that about 85% of the CEOs of large companies are hired from within. So you can give people a tremendous incentive if they know they have a good shot of rising to the top, if they can be better than all of the other senior vice presidents. Kind of a different way of looking at things rather than just a marginal revenue product. But that being the case, notice what's happened in the United States. Suppose we look at the compensation for a CEO. Compensation includes fringe benefits, stock options, which we'll talk about towards the end of this lecture. But salary and all the other benefits that they get. What you can see is that the ratio of what a CEO makes compared to a typical worker, it's about 278 to 1. Wow. CEOs tend to make 278 times what the typical worker winds up making. That's quite a big gap. And you can see, and I always tell you, when you see numbers, don't memorize the numbers. What's the story the numbers tell you? CEOs make a lot more than the typical worker, and that has certainly risen over time. Now, not only do CEOs in the United States make a lot of money, but you can see compared to other nations, the ratio of CEO salary to the average worker is larger in the United States than in other nations. So the average CEO salary, you can see it's quite high in the United States, but it's also high relative to the average worker. I did a quick search. I couldn't find the newer data from Japan, but in Japan, it's much more equal than it is in any of these nations. The idea in Japan is people try and not stand out. There's in Japan, they teach kids very young that the nail that sticks up is the one that's pounded down. You don't want to be different. So the ratio of CEO salary to average worker salary is high in the United States, and the United States workers make a lot of money. So why do CEOs have such high salaries? Well, we've talked about one reason. That's the idea. Maybe it's a way of setting up your pay structure to incentivize everybody below the CEO to work really hard to try and get that golden ring. You might think right now a manager job making $150,000 a year sounds great, but if you're there, a lot of people are saying, you know what, I want to go up the ladder. But there are other reasons as well. Maybe the marginal revenue product of CEOs is quite high. You can imagine a situation, be it Apple, be it General Motors, whatever, the decisions the CEO makes can literally affect the bottom line by billions of dollars. So you might be paying people because they do have a high marginal revenue product. Taxes, actually that should be lower in the United States. My mistake, my bad. Taxes are actually lower in the United States compared to to Europe. So people want their pay in the form of a salary rather than getting fringe benefits. So in Europe, you might be likely to let the CEO have a villa or let him ride in a jet. In the United States, give the people the money because the taxes are lower. Once again, that should have been lower. My bad. Okay, cultural differences. I touched on that briefly in talking about Japan. And in Japan, there's more of a feeling that people should be equal. You shouldn't stand out. So one of the reasons CEOs make more relative to the typical worker in the United States is we don't have that feeling. We feel it's much more of, look, at if you're good enough, you should get that money, compared to a nation where they might say we're all in this together. And finally, there might be what I call a cozy relationship between the CEO and the board of directors. The board of directors, frequently, the CEO will work to get a slate of people that will run to become a member of the board of directors. And if you're on the board of directors, you might get paid, say, $50,000 a year to attend 4 meetings a year. I wish I could get $50,000 for every 4 meetings that I attend, but that does not happen. So, you have this cozy relationship. The CEO gives people this job on the board. The board appoints a group called the compensation committee to decide the salary of the CEO. So what winds up happening? The board feels very grateful for the CEO to help get them on the board. They wind up recommending a high salary. And the CEO winds up recommending people to sit on the board that might in fact wind up giving him a high salary. It does contribute to high CEO salaries. Now, one of the ways that CEOs can make a lot of money, I thought I'd spend a few minutes just mentioning this, is something called a stock option. A stock option is a way to give people an incentive to work hard now to get some kind of bonus later in the future. A stock option gives you the right to buy one share of a company's stock at $50. So, if you can buy it at $50, they might say anytime in the next 5 years you can buy the one share of stock at $50. So the CEO might get 400,000 options. The senior vice presidents might get 100,000. The higher up you are, the more stock options you get. Well, if the stock goes up to $60 a share, then you exercise your option. In other words, you have the right to buy the stock at $50. If the stock goes up to $60, then you buy the stock at 50, sell it at 60, you make $10. If you have 400,000 shares, you've just made $4 million. So this is one way to get CEOs to perhaps think about the long run, the long run profitability of the firm. You can tie stock options any way you want. Now, what happens if it turns out the stock price goes down to $45? Your option is what they call below water. In other words, you have the right to buy something if it goes down to $45 that you could, you have the right to buy it at 50, and if it goes down to 45, why would you want to pay 50 for it? Your stock option is worthless. But if you can do a good job for the company and the stock price goes up, you benefit by being able to buy shares of stock at a low price and then turn around and sell them at a high price. So, as you're going out there and going for your first job, you might want to say, hey, are there any stock options associated with this job? So anyway, just thought I'd explain to you a little bit about CEO salaries. Take care, and maybe someday, 30 years in the future, you guys will be CEOs and you can have some of these stock options to share with Ohio Wesleyan. Take care and be well.